Now the party can get started.
All right, we're live now.
We're live?
Yep.
All right. It's the appointed hour, so let's get this going. Good evening, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled February meeting of the Portsmouth Planning Board. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2021. First thing on the agenda, are there any modifications to the agenda? All right, Ms. Lozinski says no, so we're going to move on. Next item on our agenda are approval of the prior planning board minutes of January 13, 2021. Everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes? Can you keep them up there?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have to stop the screen share to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
I like to be able to see the faces. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
Or to me. Yeah, or to you, yeah. Everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes of the January 13th, 2021 minutes? Was in the package that we received? Are there any changes, changes, modifications, typos?
I have one thing.
Mr. Garceau?
It was just a spelling. It was a Lock Roderick on page 2,
All right, page 2, where, sir?
the last paragraph.
Yes. What is misspelled?
Roderick, Lock Roderick, 70.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it's Roderick's instead of Rogers?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Robert's right.
Good pickup, thank you. Anything else, Dave?
Yes, I have a comment.
Anybody else?
Kathleen does, but I can't hear her.
I can't hear Kathleen either. How are we doing with that, Mike?
It's on her end. She's gonna turn her.
Kathleen, have you got your mic on? Nope, it's off now.
Let me see her. Is she even on?
Let's go to page three.
She just went off.
And we weren't able to see her either, so there might be some technical glitch. Let's wait for her to come back on. I think there she is.
Is she there?
Is she okay? Can you hear us, Kathleen?
She's muted and her video is muted. No, now her microphone's on.
Still can't hear you, Ms. Wilson.
I don't know what's wrong.
Can hear you now.
There you go.
Okay. Yes, page 2,
Yup.
Jason Cavero. It should be J-A-Y Cavero.
That's in the middle,
Yes,
Ethel Drive, so that should be J.
yes,
J-A-Y. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, on page 3, the same Lark Rogers.
Oh, yeah, it shows up
Way
there,
down,
so it
it's
should be
again.
Rogers.
Yes. That was just to correct Lark's last name.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, happens again on 4.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought he was a couple of times.
Yeah, it's going to be in there a few times. I'll go.
So that's right in the middle of page 4. I don't know if he shows up in here. Anybody else? All right, subject to those typos and changes,
I'd like
what's
to
the
make,
pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes with those corrections.
Second,
Did you second it, Colleen, Ms. Wilson?
yes, I did.
All right. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. It has to be a voice vote, so we'll go through it. Mr. Harding,
Approved.
Mr. Lopes,
Aye.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye,
Mr. Garceau,
Aye.
Mr. Tibbetts,
Aye.
Mr. Colati,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So the unanimous vote, there are no negatives. All right, so that brings us to next item on the agenda, which is the applicant is Theodore Pyatt. How do you say it?
I think it's Pikes.
Pikes. The owner, the applicant is Mr. Theodore Pikes. Owner is Dwayne Horton. This is AP 29 lot 113B, corner of East Main Road and Hillside Road. This is a request for an advisory opinion to the zoning board for the construction of a building to host electrical equipment. The applicant here.
Mr. Chair, Tom Pritzby, Engineering, on behalf of the applicant, and the applicant is here as well.
Okay. Mr. How do you say Mr. Pike's last name? Is that correct?
I believe.
Yes.
Yes, okay, just want to make sure. You may proceed.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Tom Pritzby, Engineering Company. We're here this evening to seek an advisory opinion from the planning board as we seek our approval process to the zoning board, which I believe is in a couple of weeks. Previously, we went to, I believe last week, we went to design review board and we received some feedback from them and some comments, which we're going to take under advisement. Pretty much this is a very simplistic project that we have here on Hillside Road and East Main Road itself. It's in a commercial C1 zone. It's just under 8,000 square feet. The actual square footage is 7,400 square feet to be exact. It is a telecommunications building itself. I can have our client kind of elaborate a little bit more about what he's proposing on the actual use itself. But it is a 24 by 24 building, so it's just a little less than 600 square feet. It's a very small footprint. We have an OWTS that's been designed for the system just for one bathroom. We already have our DEM permit in hand for it. Parking, again, there's going to be minimal parking that's required just for the nature of this building itself. We do have 2 parking spaces in a driveway type fashion off to the north side on Hillside Road itself. The roof will be collected with 2 bioretention rain gardens. And we do have a set of arborvitaes and plantings that is located along the easterly side of the property line. Even though that is a commercial zone with that separate parcel, there is potential for residential development in the near future. So just, side of caution and just following the regulations with commercial and residential zones, we thought it'd be prudent to just do our typical plantings for screening purposes. Again, we are going to be serviced. We're going to have some propane tanks on site, concrete transformer pads as shown on the site plans, a generator pad for backup power. And we went over with the design review board our signage, which will be in compliance with the zoning ordinance, and it's based on the frontage. As we know, we are at about 16 square foot sign, which is going to be shown out in the front of the building itself. Very brief, Ted, our client, Ted, if you want to add anything to the actual usage of the building and explain to the board members what you're proposing.
Absolutely. So this building is going to be what's considered a telecom shack. And I'm hearing just a little bit of an echo, so if the town of Portsmouth could somehow mute their mic, that'd be great. But the building itself is just meant to keep the telecom equipment in a special location, and then this will run equipment to be an internet service provider in the Portsmouth area. We don't anticipate a lot of vehicular traffic to this building. We do have garage storage just to be able to get equipment in and out of the building easily. It's more like a loading, but that's only more for one-off for the installation of the equipment and get the equipment in and out of the building. I don't anticipate a lot of vehicular traffic in this area just because a lot of the equipment can be managed remotely, and we just hope to keep a low profile and that's really the skinning of it. I don't know if there's any other question at this point in time.
Mr. Chair, this is Seth. I have a couple questions.
Yeah, I know, I just, we were muted there for a second, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Solari.
There's a septic facility here on the, what is it, the west corner of the site? Is there going to be, restroom facilities or anything like that inside?
So we're just proposing a convenience bathroom here. I mean, this septic system is, very well over designed for the actual usage. Again, there is just a bathroom just to have the convenience of someone relieving themselves every once in a while. And again, it's not intended for a full-time employee. I believe, there will be one person to check up on this facility every once in a while itself. So that's been reviewed and approved by the DEM already.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. I
Yep.
looked at the floor plan. I just didn't see like a facility on the floor plan. That's why I was asking.
Oh,
That's all.
okay. Yeah, there should be a
Um,
bathroom in one of the corners.
All right, so will that be on your final submission or whatever?
So on the site, I mean, I'm sure it'd be on the architecturals when we submit for the building permit, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I like your roof runoff rain garden detail. That's really nice. We like to see, managing all that stormwater on site.
Yep,
Using native plants if possible.
right, yep.
But can I ask the chair, does this meets the zoning requirements for the parcel?
Well, you're sort of going where I wanted to go. Mr. Solicitor. Well, let me ask the applicant this. Do you meet all the setback requirements and
Yes.
the other site issues? So is the only reason that you're in front of us is because of the use, is that correct?
That's my understanding, Mr. Chair, yes.
So otherwise, as a matter of right, you'd be able to put this in because you meet all the other requirements. Is that an accurate statement?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
I'm just checking. Did that take care of what you were asking, Seth?
Sure does. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a special use or something in that nature.
It is a special use, but it's
Oh, it is a special use. So is it a variance from the zoning board? Is that what they're looking for?
correct. They're looking for well, we don't make the decision, we make a recommendation
Right.
to the zoning board in this particular instance.
Okay, I understand now. And the reason for the variance is that they don't meet the setback requirements.
No, they meet all the setback requirements.
Oh, okay. Okay,
It's
thank you.
It's the use
I
that
see.
requires them to go through this process.
But it's basically light commercial use, like not a lot of foot traffic, vehicle traffic, etc.
Yeah,
Does the ordinance,
because it's going to be utility use always has to go through this process.
public utility use is allowed by special use permit and all
That's
districts, so.
Mr. Gass.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, this is Dee Dee. Could you ask the applicant to give his full name and address?
Yeah, I tried, but I wasn't successful. The applicant, Mr. Pipes, your name and address, your full name and address.
Okay, I think there's a question on the floor for me. I'm having a hard time following a little bit, but I'm checking the Q&A. I think someone asked the full name and address.
Correct.
And, okay, so the address hasn't been, for the building itself, I think would be a sign that at some point it'll be
What's
3055
your
Eastern.
business
So
address, sir?
my address, my personal address is 85 Glen Road in Portsmouth.
All
I don't
right.
know if I answered any
Please
question.
clarify, so I don't have any problem with that.
Okay.
Did you get the other gentleman's name and address as well, Dave?
Yes, that's Mr. Principe. He's pretty, I have him. I
Okay.
didn't get Mr. Pites's street. I didn't catch that.
85 Glen Road, Portsmouth, I believe.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Ryan.
Yes.
So I see, I appreciate the screening to the east. I see, from East Main Road, basically a side profile shed with a transformer pad, a generator pad. And I'm just curious, I saw the design review board comments flash up, but I don't have those in my packet.
There we go.
So I'm wondering if the petitioner can maybe just recap if there's any recommendations from that they're adhering to.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to try to,
Absolutely, go ahead.
we have it in front of you?
Again, identify yourself, sir.
Oh, Mr. Chair, Tom Pritzapy.
Thank you.
Yep. Is that something that can be pulled up on the screen on your end or?
We do actually have one. I was given a copy of it today, so it does exist. Mike, do you have that
Yeah, it's up.
in a digital format? You'll see that it's up on the screen now.
Okay. I don't believe
in
myself.
regards-
I'm sorry, Tom Pritzby. Mr. Chair, and I think Mike is on the other side of this. I don't think myself and the applicant had received a digital copy of that review.
I just got it a couple days ago, and I hadn't had a chance to forward it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right. If you could send it along and when you get a chance.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. It's my phone.
There are, the summary of the advisory opinion, let me read it to you guys since it's very, very tough. It says the design review board is suggesting that the building materials be modified. Suggested building materials would include hardy board or clapboard looking vinyl for the siding, architectural shingles on the roof, mullion and or molding windows, and a colonial barn-like design for the garage doors, which with coinciding handles and hinges. It is also recommended that the focus of the planting be on East Main Road property line, as well as the view from Hillside Road, screen the generator and transformers that are set on the west side of the building. The additional focus would be the east property line with a row of arborvitae. Planting should be set off the corner of Hillside Road at a minimum of 15 to 20 feet. This is to ensure that there is a visual site triangle, and then it goes and there is a detailed plan. You can see that up there of the various plants and their sizes. So that's the recommendation of the board design. I don't know if that answers the question that was posed, but again, I just received that tonight as well.
So that recommendation appears to answer my concern from the east. I guess the question is if the petitioners had an opportunity to say they're prepared to conform to that opinion.
Yes, we're prepared. We're amenable to all of these recommendations for the project. Yes.
That take care of everything, Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else from the board? Okay, hearing nobody, I'll open it up to the public. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to address this petition?
So if you are on the Zoom app, you can use the raise hand function, or if you're calling in, you can dial *9. And I don't see any.
Well, we'll give it a second. You just told them how to do it. Technology is not that easy for most people. Have to give them a couple of seconds. I mean, come on. Do we have anybody? No. I'll give it one more minute and then we'll go do what we need to do, whatever that is. All right, hearing nothing from the public, I'm going to close the public discussion. What's the pleasure of the board on this application?
I'd like to make a motion that we do give a favorable advisory opinion based on them agreeing to the design review board's changes
Recommendation.
in the recommendation, so that it's a favorable opinion from us to the zoning, to the construction of the building.
Is there a second?
Second,
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Again, we have to do this by voice. Everybody understand the motion? Any changes? Any more discussion? Okay. I'm going to call for a vote. Mr. Hardy.
Aye.
Mr. Lopes.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
aye.
Mr. Garceau.
Aye.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Aye.
Mr. Pelati.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. There are no other votes, so the ayes have it. Okay, so that takes care of item number 3. This brings us to item number 4, the town council's request for the planning board to assess the recommendations to the solar ordinance made by Mr. Miller from Grossmart, Rhode Island. So that's the letter was looking for. That letter, the other letter is. That's important. That's the one. Is Mr. Miller here?
I don't see him online now.
All right. I see Mr. Is Mr. Crosby though?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, he's on.
I'd like to see the faces here.
Yeah, we can try to get
Mr. Crosby, you there?
I am indeed.
Had an opportunity to review this letter.
I have.
Your comments, please.
I think that his comments regarding an additional definition of utility scale solar facilities is worth considering. I think that his consideration of an incentive for where we want to encourage solar development and an increase in by 50% of the land suitable for development is certainly worth considering. However, considering the fact that so much of Portsmouth is zoned residential, I'm not certain that would be worthwhile. Definition of solar lot coverage, certainly worth considering, and as far as setbacks are concerned, for medium and large solar projects, we took that from the state's the state's model language, and I don't see any need for that particularly to change. Certainly, it could be considered by the board if you see fit. And a decommissioning requirement is certainly an important function and probably should be written in.
No. So let's get the feedback from, anybody have any questions of Mr. Crosby?
This is Seth. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I sort of disagree on the 200-foot setback section. What is it, E.2 or whatever? As we saw at the last meeting, there was 2 proposed solar developments, and they were, sort of touting that they were meeting the setback requirements and in fact doubling them. And honestly, I live right around the corner from there. I don't neighbor it, but it's not enough in the wintertime. You're going to see right through the 200-foot setback of undisturbed vegetation. I mean, if you can't provide that, I feel like it's probably not the right place for a solar facility. It's the last thing I would honestly want to see looking out my back window. Unfortunately, solar is a thing. Everybody loves it. It's great. It's green energy. There's incentives from the state. So of course, people want to do something with their land. The decommissioning, you definitely need to include that because otherwise there's no incentive for them to do it.
We have that in there. They're talking about an expansion of it. I'm not sure
Right,
exactly
right
what-
now the setback is 50 feet for the ordinance, and what they're proposing is we change it to 200, right? Is that-
Commissioning set.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand. So I would be in favor of the 200-foot setback
All right.
requirement.
I don't think we're going to be voting on any of that now because we don't have any specific language in front of us, but let's get some more input. Anybody else on the board wish to address the letter? Mr.
Mr.
Lopez?
Chair, I do like the idea of number 4 for solar canopies. That could be an option, particularly in commercial areas, to be able to go higher than 12 feet and still be able to park cars under it. So I think that is something we might want to consider. That's all I had to say about his letter.
Michael?
To clarify, Mike Ashola, Assistant Town Planner, to clarify Ed's point of view on the limit to the solar canopies, we would consider them as a carport, and it would be a roof-mounted system, so it would be allowed by right wherever they could locate a carport.
So that's a
Okay, thank you.
That's in the
Thank you.
I guess I have a question.
Hang on, Mr. Harding.
Yeah, where a carport is allowed, usually if you have a ground mounted solar panel, they have to be a certain distance from the property line. And I'm just curious what a carport, if it could be by rights closer than what ground mounted solar panels are.
Would be the safe setback from
It is the
a
same.
building.
Which is,
Depends on the.
Depends on the location, yeah. Did that answer your question?
yeah, well, I mean, regular solar fields, we're talking about 200-foot buffer and all that stuff. And I know it's not that for residential, but I was told that like on some land, you still have to be, 40 feet or 30
Again, I think
feet.
it depends on the array and the land itself. We can go back and take a look at this. We're probably not going to get this thing done today.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of it being on top of.
Anyone else on the board?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Ryan.
Go ahead, Mr. Ryan.
So just going back to what Gary and Seth brought up on the setbacks, at least to the residential areas. And I think I heard Gary say that setback we have is based on state, which is 50. And I know we're not going to solve this today, and I think Seth suggested over 200. So I'm not looking to solve it, but I think that last petitioner proposed 150 feet. And I just throw out there that, we all want more space, more setback and green space, but I feel like at some point, the properties aren't going to be, big enough scale left to make it viable for solar on a lot of the sites that we maybe have out there. And I just feel like if I'm a residential abutter, I would also be cognizant and realize that, the alternative is a developer is going to have the right to clear cut up to the property line. And you're going to maybe have an activity that has noise, light, and other encroachment on the site. So just throw that out there.
Anybody else on the board?
I'd like to bring
Mr.
up,
Harding?
Mr. Harding, that there are some sites that 150 feet, because it's up on the crest of somewhere, whether it was 100 feet or 200 feet, you're not going to see it. So for a general description of 200 feet in most cases, but I would imagine there are some cases that if you're down in a gully, whether you're 200 feet or 150 feet, there should be an allowable space to have an exception. Like Mr. Tibbet says, the land's got to be used, people pay taxes on it, and if it doesn't affect a neighbor to get that little more panel out of it, I think it's not such a bad idea.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Is that you, Mr. Lopes?
That's it, Edward Lopes. I agree with Mr. Tibbetts. I think that, we heard testimony last month that there's very few sites that are feasible. I think if you had a commercial zone like we looked at and you're trying to obtain a 200-foot setback, I agree with Mr. Tibbetts that you could end up with a much more objectionable use of the parcel than a passive solar system. So perhaps it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but I think 200 feet might be too much. That's all. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Can I state one thing? I do see the point, and I appreciate.
You have to identify yourself, sir. Mr. Paul.
Councilman Palat, thank you. I do appreciate the counterpoint, and it does make sense as well. The issue, I think, is the case-by-case basis. I think having the 200 foot gives us the option to kind of look at it, whereas with the 50 feet, honestly, in those other two sites with screening, it would probably be fine, but they were only proposing screening on, the one portion of the site that abutted Sweet Farm, whereas the north border of the site, they weren't going to do anything. So if you actually look at that site, those are all deciduous trees. They lose their leaf cover in the winter, and guess what? You see right through the 50 feet, like nothing. If they had proposed maybe planting some evergreen trees there, which aren't going to lose their leaves, I would have been a lot more in favor of that site.
Well, that's something that first of all, that petition was just a conceptual plan. There's not actually a petition in front of anybody right now. And
Okay.
If we want to put a buffer in that says, these are the trees that you're going to put in, then that's what they're going to do.
I'd like to have the option to recommend that, right? Instead of just like giving them carte blanche and they meet 50 feet and then there's nothing, and then we say, well, the ordinance is the ordinance, our hands are kind of tied. It would be nice to be able to, like you guys say, look at it on a case-by-case basis, evaluate the hill slope, evaluate all the merits of the site. I mean, I'm all for solar, trust me. It's just, it's got to be in the right parcel and it's got to be in the right configuration.
All right.
So maybe they don't need an 8 megawatt array, maybe they need a 6 megawatt array. You know what I mean? That's all I'm saying. We need to have the ability to evaluate each site. Thank you.
We don't have any actual language in front of us. You're just looking at it conceptually. And I think I understand what you're saying.
I'm right there with you too.
That was Mr. Harding.
Yes.
Anybody else on the board wish to speak to this? Because we're going to open it up to the public. All right, let's do so.
So again, members of the public, if you are joining us by Zoom, use the raise your hand feature to be called on. And if you are dialed in, you can use the *9 dial in, and that'll give us the same hand raised in our Zoom platform. All right, we have Court Chappelle.
Mr. Chappelle, I was wondering if we were going to hear from you.
So hold on a second, I just put the wrong person
We
on.
knew we came from.
I believe.
Hang on. Technical difficulties, hang on. Wonderful world of Zoom.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Court.
We can hear you. Go ahead, Mr. Chappelle.
There I am. I was going to go last after other people talked, but I just want you to understand how it got
Mr.
here.
Chappelle, name and address, you know the drill.
Oh, sorry. Fort Chappelle. Law offices at 171 Chase Road. And I just want to again remind you how we got here. I drafted or helped with Mr. Crosby and Mr. Asciola and I think 4 meetings of the planning board, this ordinance. And a lot of this has been discussed. I also pitched it at the council back on, I believe, April or May when it was approved, and then it was challenged because of the way it was continued due to a COVID issue. heard again on November 23rd, and this letter was brought before the council. The council debated just exactly what you're debating, and in a 4-3 vote passed the ordinance again, and then said, but we should send this to the planning board in case the planning board didn't hear these things before. So I would like to go through very quickly, but everybody's comments are very accurate. The problem is the ordinance, in my opinion, takes care of your comments. So let's go through it one at a time. The easy ones, the canopy. Canopies are allowed under this ordinance. And the height, despite the gross smart letter, is not listed, limited to 12 feet. If you go to the height section, which is section E, it specifically says building mounted SES. A canopy or a garage are solar panels that are mounted on a structure that requires a structural building permit. Because they're mounted on the side and not ground mounted, they are not limited to 12 feet. If you recall, we wanted to make sure that whether it was a roof or other system, it didn't exceed whatever the height restriction in the zone was. So even if I have a 35-foot flat roof, I can't put a solar panel on top of it unless I would need a 30-foot roof and then set it at an angle so the highest point wasn't 35 feet. That was a change that you made, so we can't be. To Mr. Harding's question, any building that requires a building permit, including a canopy, would have to meet the setback requirements of that zone. But if I have a Budweiser brewery plant, I can be 50 feet away from a residential zone on a lot line. And what we're debating is to say, despite the fact I can be 50 foot away with a Budweiser plant or 15 feet away in a residential with a pool or a tennis court or a house, we should be 200 feet away. This ordinance in residential zones, everyone has to get a special use permit. In every special use permit, this ordinance requires it also come to this planning board to do a full site design, so we have consistency. So anybody that goes through in a residential zone has to come not only to the zoning board, but to the planning board. And subparagraph F, despite the fact that the minimum is 50, says that buffer natural vegetation, landscape screening shall be provided as determined by the zoning board or the planning board upon the existing land use on the site to mitigate impacts to views, scenic roads, and abutters. The planning board and board of zoning board shall have authority to set site-specific widths, buffers, heights of plants at planting, so to require an opaque screen to adjacent properties and or public roads. If you think that takes 300 feet, then that's what you do, because this ordinance gives you power to do it. So let's look at the practical implications of what's come before you. That particular lot, that is Mr. Scher's lot on West Main Road, light industry, that doesn't make it a good spot for zoning, for solar. You're gonna have a difficult time screening that from West Main Road. There was a big discussion at the council how ugly the one across from Melville is. The one across from Melville, or the cross from the Dunkin' Donuts, is on federal land. Federal land requires no zoning permits. Nobody asked you about opaque screening. Nobody asked you about setbacks, and nobody had to. It's the very reason we have the ordinance. Yes, it's a minimum of 50 feet, but you can in fact increase it. That's really what you're talking about. Let me give you why we chose to put them in residential zones as well as industrial zones and commercial zones in Portsmouth, because we are not Exeter and we are not urban, and we don't have an industrial zone left. We have a couple of industrial pieces, all of which are surrounded 100% by residential zones. So when you carte blanche say, if I built a house next to an industrial zone that could have a power plant 50 feet from me, I'm gonna make them put 200 feet away, maybe those neighbors you would consider their concerns a little less than if it was truly in a residential zone. Grossmart wants you to put them in environmental places like contaminated sites. I agree. The dump is a contaminated site in the town of Portsmouth. It's an R10 zone. It is a proper place potentially for a solar, yet it's R10. So you can't just carte blanche and say one size fits all. That's why nothing is allowed as a matter of right in Portsmouth. It all must go to a special use permit in residential zones, and it all must come before you, even in industrial zones. So I think, at least as far as setbacks, vegetation, block from roads, block from neighbors on all sides, you have all the tools to do that in this ordinance. If you carte blanche, say 200 feet, let me talk to you about a 36-acre piece on West Shore Road that most of you know I'm involved in, and maybe coming to a theater near you. If you put 200 feet along 1,000 or 1,700 feet of road frontage on West Shore Road, you put 200-foot buffer times 1,700 feet. That's 340,000 square feet. You take out 8 acres of land that a developer or an owner would be able to utilize for solar or any other use, and you bar it. When you multiply that by the 2 side periods, the sides at 200 feet residential, you take out another 5 acres on each side. When you have to stay 200 feet from the coastal feature on a contiguous wetland that comes in, you take out another 550 feet times 500 feet. A 36-acre piece becomes a 6-acre piece of property that you can put zoning in the middle. The people against zoning regulate by putting regulations that make it economically infeasible to do it. You need to look at them on a case-by-case basis. If it's a flat piece of property and you can block it with 50 foot of buffer along the road, then block it. If I can't see it because there are deciduous trees, then it doesn't really matter if there's a 200-foot buffer or a 50-foot buffer if I can only see 50 feet. And you have to make it practical. You will eliminate all of the parcels. Solar is not going to come and overrun your town. There is a fixed amount of space in the national grid system that people apply to get to. And once that space is used up, it's done. It will go into the parcels that are economically feasible to do it. And we'll get through this and we'll bear our share of having solar in the town of Portsmouth as written. The decommission plan. If the ordinance says that the planning board, you, will have to get a decommissioning plan. It is true that the statute may not say as written what the terms of that decommissioning plan are, but we should wait till you have at least one full petition in front of you to decide whether you've failed. You guys are a pretty thorough board. A decommission plan in every other town, and I'm sure the one in Portsmouth, and I'm sure the one that every solar industry is willing to do, is to say, here is the cost of taking this down. You then have to get today's cost of taking it down, and you have to multiply that cost by 110%. And you post the same bond that you make a person that's putting in a subdivision say. That bond can't be released until the until the project is gone. If it stops producing electricity, you have a bond called in that you have money, the town has money to go in there and rip it down. Above that, this ordinance says it's a lien on the land. So even if the bond fails, and even if 110% wasn't enough, you now have a mortgage and a lien on the underlying fee simple of fee property against the owner so that the town is made whole. You can't just throw out things from Grossman and that doesn't exist in this ordinance, because it does. I've never had to defend an ordinance so much that's never even tried to be implemented yet. This is like my third public appearance to try to say, guys, this ordinance has all of that stuff. That's why you passed it. That's why it was recommended by Mr. Crosby. That's why it was recommended by Mike Asciola. Let's see it fail. Let's see the zoning board and planning board say, you know what? Despite the fact that we have the tools, we didn't do it before we change the law and make it mandatory that I don't count on my public officials to do the right thing. So I can answer any other questions that you have about any specifics in that ordinance, but there is absolutely nothing there that you cannot protect if you do your jobs correctly. And I have never seen you not do that.
Okay, I have a question.
Well, hang
Yeah.
on, hang on. You out of wind there, Mr. Chappelle?
What's that?
Did you run out of air or?
No, I'm frustrated.
Well, you're probably gonna have to do it at least one more time. Mr. Hardy.
Interesting thing, and I like what you said, and I understand what you said. One thing that maybe I misunderstood it, you can correct it. You said ultimately, there is only so much solar that National Grid can accept here on Aquidneck Island. So you're saying that there will become a limit to how much solar can be here on our island? Is
As
that?
I understand it, at least now, you have to do an interconnect study, which means their system, their lines, their transfer stations have to be able to handle it. You have to petition them to handle it. And now that petition comes it's not only that your system can handle it, it includes where I'm going to sell the electricity and a proof that there's need for it.
So my question,
Let him finish.
yeah, okay.
Are you finished, Mr. Chappelle?
Oh, I'm just trying to answer that question. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Hardy.
So my question is, let's just say if it really happens that the tank farm land becomes available at some point in time. And because it's so contaminated, everybody's wishes are that it would be solar fields or something like that. Is there a reasonable chance that there'd be enough electricity left to be able to produce that people won't have consumed in other solar fields, not that it's their problem, that they will be producing enough electricity so that it will knock out the tank farms from being possible solar fields completely out of everybody's view?
Well, there was a proposal for the tank farms.
Yeah.
And that was a proposal where the electricity was to be pre-sold to the 5 colleges. And the issue in that case was it's pending, and as far as I know, still moving forward. The issue was they were to use the Jepson Lane transfer station, which is brand new and has capacity. So there is a project to use the Jepson Lane capacity there. There's an issue that's still pending that I don't know if there's been resolution to on how to get there from here. Because when you put in a solar, our ordinance says you don't just look at the site that you're putting the solar panels on, but you look at the distribution lines and how to get it to either the Dexter Street station or the Jepson station. And if those poles require to be 45 feet instead of 40 feet, well, the town may have an opinion as to whether or not those poles should be along a public thoroughfare or cut through a neighborhood, for instance. So there's a bunch of issues that every solar developer has to go through. But I do know that there are plans for those tank farms and are plans for those tank farms.
So one last question is, percentage wise, if these current fields that are proposed in front of us, are they 2%, 10%, 40% of what capability the National Grid has to accept the electricity from there? Or are we going to be maxed out in a matter of no time? I don't have any sense.
No, I know that each of the individual transfer stations have a capacity, and then they have a very expensive at the developer's cost to increase that capacity. And then there is the end user portion that is involved in the PUC approvals. So all I'm saying is the need for electricity is finite.
Yeah.
And the systems that they are running on are finite. if you think there's a great rush, remember the world thought that as of April 11th, we had a solar ordinance. You haven't seen a single application. You saw 2 last week because somebody thought they had to get it on an agenda before the council meeting that decided whether or not the ordinance was any good, and they're conceptual, but still in the diaper stage. There has not been a rush on solar because of this ordinance. There was the person that I designed, or that we started drafting the ordinance for, who has not moved forward. There are the 2 federals that we have nothing to do with because they require no permit, and one's in Middletown, I think one's in Portsmouth, as you refer to as the tank farms. There was the parcel on Jepson Lane that went to Superior Court after it was approved, and then they said they couldn't come back. To my knowledge, they haven't come back. They certainly didn't come back to my office and ask that it be reinstated. And then there is some in the pipelines, including one for that I'm involved in down on the old Pearson property. So there hasn't been a run. This isn't, a panic. When you see the first one, you will be able to set your procedure and precedent, given all the tools you have in this ordinance, on how you should move forward. And I think if you look at the lots that they seem to be proposed on, it's a pretty easy thing to look at to say, this is more likely to belong here and more likely to belong there, and how the board could very easily encourage one and discourage another.
I've never insinuated, nor was I worried. It's just that if we're supposed to make an opinion on one thing or the other, if we find that we thought endlessly people could do these and could, constantly feedback and make as much electricity as we can possibly make to be as green as we can make. And maybe the national grid's not able to handle as much as people think that it could be. And just for curiosity.
But that's the developer's problem.
Well, and I think that's the first question that might be asked before a proper expert before you, before I pretend I know what I'm talking about, because I've heard clients and developers talk about it. But I think it's a question you could ask the first one, but it wouldn't stop the first one. No one has a problem with the first one. If you find out that there is this finite piece, you may act differently. If you find out it could be a run on the bank, you may act differently as well. But I think that's still something that comes from experience you'll gain in handling these cases as they come up one at a time for you.
Yes, I am.
Anybody else have any questions of Mr. Chappelle?
This is Gary Crosby. I'd like to step in and talk about the tank farms for a second.
Go ahead.
The tank farms 1 and 2, which is, I presume, what Mr. Harding was talking about, remain federal land, and they probably will remain federal land for quite some time in the future. We, as a town, have expressed the policy, if you will, that we do not want to become land developers. We have told the Navy that we do not want to step into the middle of developing that property, and we have said to them that we would support the Navy in their endeavor to sell those properties at a public sale. So it would be incumbent for any land developer who is considering buying one or the other of those tank farms and cleaning them up, and then perhaps developing them as solar farms. They would have to look at our ordinance and decide what we would retain zoning control once the property became private property. And they would have to consider our ordinance, this ordinance that we have here, to determine whether they think that a solar farm is viable on those properties or not. So it's not really a matter of the town considering capacity or where they're going to get hooked up or what the setbacks are or whether they can or can't do that. It would be up to a private developer to solve all of those problems and decide whether a solar farm on Tank Farms 1 and 2 would be a viable project for them.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, let's open it up to the public.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add a couple things. This is Seth again.
Mr. Pilati.
Thank you. Court, first of all, great argument. I really appreciate your thoughts there. You addressed the canopy, the lot coverage issues, the loss of acreage math. I don't know if you did that in your head on the fly, but that was pretty amazing. I couldn't follow it.
I've thought about it, unfortunately, on that site.
Yeah, that was impressive. So obviously, like, the intent of this is we want to encourage certain sites for solar development. I don't think anyone on the board is against solar development. I think the problem that I saw at our last meeting was that basically every single every single call that we took was a residential objector to the site. Now, I'm new on the planning board. I don't know if that's like what always happens, but
Sure is.
nobody ever calls to say do it, right? So
it does happen occasionally. I wouldn't say it's universal, but yeah, it's pretty much the people who have most.
So court mentioned we have the power to, control this. For instance, I know you're not involved. I don't think you were involved in the last project, but what would be our steps if, for instance, they propose a 50-foot setback? How would we like get any ground on that? How would we, make them amend that? How could we? Because if they meet the requirements, how can you force them to change it?
Well, I think in fairness,
Who's speaking, Mr. Chappelle?
I'm sorry, is that question to me?
I think it was.
Okay, again, the beautiful thing is that you're each board members and can interpret it yourself. But if it were me, I would say it abuts a residential area and it requires a minimum 50 feet. But subsection F says that we have the power to make sure that we can cite a width and get a planting plan, including making you get a landscape architect to demonstrate that it is shielded from adjacent properties. And there is a possibility, if you're on the north side of a solar field, that I could put in 30-foot Leland cypress trees and block that residential area. If it's to the south side, well, then they're not going to be, you're going to have trouble with that. But you're not going to accept a planting landscape plan that has, an oak that drops its leaves every 80 feet. It says an opaque vegetated screen, and you're going to have to decide whether that's okay. If you look at, that piece that was in front of you for concept on West Main Road, one side's a highway, but it's flat and it can easily be done probably inside 50 feet. One side's a swamp and faces 24, probably not as relevant as the two sides that face residential areas. Those residential areas, those sides, I think you would have to say, I need X feet if it is landscaped as such. 200 feet in a natural buffer, if the natural buffer is grass and field, is useless. It's going to take 10 years for the scrub oak to grow high enough to block it. So I think you control through vegetation, through landscape architects. And if somebody says, I'm not going to plant anything, I'm going to leave it natural, and you might take a picture of a field and say, then I need 300 feet because we're going to see it. So that's how I think you do it.
You all set, Mr. Pilati?
I think so.
Anyone else? All right, let's try again. Public.
We have, it's Robin Yokin. If you could, please state your name and your address for the record.
My name is Robin Yunkin and I live at 49 West Passage Drive. I just have a brief comment to make. With all due respect to Mr. Chappelle, who has said tonight that Portsmouth will have to bear its share of solar and that the town will not be overrun by solar. I'm actually afraid that that is what will happen despite what he says. And I want to thank Mr. Pilati for his concern because they are the same as mine. I'm putting my faith in the planning board and other town authorities to make the right decisions to protect those of us who live in the town so that we do not have to shoulder the burden of fighting off lawyers, developers, and big utility companies every time a proposal comes up. And I keep hearing this argument that people pay taxes and should be able to do what they want with their land, but the neighbors pay taxes too. And if I wanted to put a billboard in my yard or flashing neon light, I'm sure the town would have something to say about that. I think that there are all kinds of rules for the kind of signage that goes into the town and where the buildings are located. And I think that the town should really protect itself and its residents by making sure that there's more than a buffer when something like this goes in. And the way to protect us and not to force us into coming to these meetings repeatedly and trying to convince people that 50 feet isn't enough, is to change that in the ordinance. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, hang on, you can't run away. Somebody might have a question.
All right.
Does any member of the board have a question? Okay, now you can go.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Anyone else?
We have Louis Latendre.
Yes, this is Louis Latendre, 94 Sweet Farm Road.
All right, thank you, sir.
I'm right next door to one of the solar projects is proposed. And I was very concerned with the 50 feet when I saw the plan come up with 150 feet no cut zone. I was pleased about that. I know I would feel better with 200, of course, but I understand Mr. Chappelle's point about the use, the land that would be lost. One of my questions to the board is, what is the current amount of the land that they can use for the solar panels? I think that they can put, they're proposing 7,500 panels. So my thought is that if there was a different way that they could maybe move things around so it would be pleasing to the abutters, that might be something that would make everyone feel a little better.
Well, it would be difficult to answer your question without seeing the actual plan. And there actually isn't a plan in front of anybody right now. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. Maybe somebody else has a better idea.
That plan hasn't been proposed yet?
No, that was just for a concept review. They just wanted to get a reaction. And we gave them a reaction. There hasn't been an actual petition filed.
Currently, what is the percentage of the property that can be used for solar panels? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question.
It would.
This is Mike Asciola.
Assistant Town Planner. It would be any area that outside of the buffer areas. But it would have to meet the stormwater standards that we have. So, there's going to have to be some kind of retention and distribution system in there too. So it's not just going to be all solar panels.
Yeah, it depends on the individual plan, right?
Yeah,
and the site.
It is pretty site specific.
Right.
It seems like most,
Mr. Harding,
that a lot of the plans that have shown up, the south side has always a much greater setback just because of the shadow of something. So it's just because it's 50, it might just be 50 on the north end. Not that that helps anybody, but.
Well, it has to generally face south, otherwise you're wasting your time. So.
Right. No, I'm just saying the setbacks of casting.
I'm not sure we answered your question, sir, but are you all set?
just one more point was, to Mr. Palladie's point, I do, would appreciate the larger border, because at this time, when I listened to the planning board meeting the other day, the people that were proposing the plan said that, gee, we're giving you 3 times the amount of footage on one side. So I would appreciate the ordinance to be written so they would have to come back to the board to amend it to protect most of the people in town that are paying taxes right now.
Well, first off, there isn't an application right now.
I understand that. I
Okay.
understand it, but I'm talking about the solar ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, and when they make arguments like that, that doesn't impress the board, well, trust me. You know, we're doing 3 times more. No, that doesn't apply. But yeah, I understand your concern. Is there anything else, sir, that you wish to speak to?
Not at this time. Thanks so much.
All right, no, not a problem. Do we have anybody else?
Yeah, we have Lark. Lark, if you could identify yourself, and give your name and address.
Lark Roderick, 73 West Passage Drive.
Can you say that again? I didn't get that.
Lark Roderick, 73 West Passage Drive.
Okay, thank you. Did you get that date?
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for listening to us tonight. And I did want to put that if it's not in the solar ordinance to begin with, it's going to be something that everyone who lives in a neighborhood that solar can come in has to watch like a hawk. I think that, you know, it's nice to think that the ordinance is actually taking care of the people that live around these areas. I've been to several meetings about the solar ordinance, and court has explained them over again. And the thing is that it appears that it protects the person that's putting the solar in, but the neighbor is not so much. And I'm counting on you to watch the neighbor's back. And I have a lot of faith that you'll do that. I actually live on the south side of an area that was proposed, and I get a 50-foot setback. I didn't move here to be away from solar. So I just wanted to tell you that people that live in the neighborhood are concerned and helping out for them. And I thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? All right, anybody else?
There's David Howard. David, if you could identify yourself and give your address as well. David Howard?
Yes, my name's David Howard. I live at 36 Mariel Drive.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Mr. Howard, could you say that again, your address again?
It's 36 Mariel Rose Drive.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
Okay, thanks. Again, I appreciate especially Mr. Palladie's point of view and looking out for the residents. And I do also acknowledge that developers and landowners that pay taxes on land should have some freedom to do what they think is right with their property. And I think this can all be worked out. And I think both the planning board and the zoning board are full of responsible people who are not going to let anybody run roughshod over them. However, I do have a concern on the bigger picture. Mr. Crosby said that the Navy site is not our problem, but it is. It's ugly. It's caused a lot of people to look at it and say, I don't want any of that anywhere near me if it's going to look like that. Secondly, if you look at the sites that have been both built and proposed, they are concentrated in a fairly small area of town. If you're in Redwood Farms, you've got 2 sites that are supposed to be built. You've got Chase Farms, you've got the lot on Stringham, you've got the Shears property, you've got Cox's backyard, and you have Lehigh Terrace. That's all in a fairly concentrated area of town. And it has the distinct possibility of changing people's perception of the town. A lot of people come down West Main Road. So all I ask is that when the boards consider, from a planning perspective or a zoning perspective, whether or not we're getting saturated. I personally feel that in our neck of the woods, we are. And I know that you can't write that into an ordinance, but it's a real fear of mine that the whole west side of Portsmouth is going to become just saturated with solar panels. And I thank you for your attention.
Well, hang on, somebody might have a question.
Okay.
Any member of the board have a question? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any next on the agenda?
No one's put their hands up. So last call for anyone who wants to give public comment. Again, if you're dialing in, it's *9 on the phone, and if you are using the Zoom app, it's the raise hand function.
All right, we're going to close the public comment period.
Mr. Chairman, and Gary Crosby, if there is no one else, I have one observation or I have one comment that I would like to make.
And so do I, but go ahead.
I have at least one town councilor who appears to be expecting that the planning board will come back to the town council with recommendations for updating or changing or amending the solar ordinance. It doesn't appear that that is the case, and so I would.
You're getting ahead of yourself, Mr. Crosby.
I'm sorry?
You're getting ahead of yourself.
All I want to ask for is that if you are not going to make any recommendations about updating the solar ordinance, that we have Dee Dee provide the town council with a transcript of this discussion so that they get an idea about what your comments are.
Well, again, you're ahead of yourself because I have a comment on this.
Okay, I'll wait till you comment and then I'll comment.
I think you might want to. And again, we're all doing this on the fly. I'm pretty comfortable with the ordinance that we have now, but I readily admit, and I think everybody on the board will readily admit, none of us are experts on solar. We have a letter from Growth Smart. They're certainly involved in the development field. They have some insights that we might not have. We asked the planner right at the beginning whether or not there were things that he thinks that we should consider. He gave us a list of those things that he thought might be appropriate to take a look at. We don't have any specific language on that. I appreciate Mr. Chappelle's input, but one of the things that he said that disturbed me was the idea that we shouldn't change the ordinance until it's failed. And that I object to strenuously. The fact of the matter is that there's a problem with the ordinance and we need to address it, then we should do that in anticipation of dealing with those problems, not waiting till the ordinance has failed, and now we have to deal with the mess that's created because it has been. So this is just me. It's my putting this out there. I think that we should continue this for 1 month. We should put it in the hands of Mr. Crosby. He should review it in light of the things that he thinks need to be looked at, and he should come back with specific language changes that he proposes. And that's just my thought on this, because I mean, right now we have an ordinance, we don't have to change it. But I think that if there's other people that have input that we need to take a look at, then let's do that and let's try to get this right. So that's just my view, and I don't know what anybody else wants to say on that, but
I'd like to make a comment, Seth Blatt. I'd like to hear Mr. Crosby's, basically what I'm looking for is like a step-by-step description of how we can control this. I know Mr. Capel said that it's in our power to do it, but I'm still not 100% clear on how we can influence like the developments of last week, our last planning board meeting, where basically they met the requirements. So there's really, our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do. It's their right. We can approve it. I think there needs to be something stronger in there that allows us to influence the design, influence the plan. You know, and I'm not trying to crush everything. I'm not trying to, you know, put a 200-foot setback in. I agree that's what they said in the thing, but maybe that's not the right thing. But we at least need the power to have an opinion and not just say we met 50 feet, that's it, we're walking away.
That's fine. Anybody else have any more comments? And then if not, then I'll entertain a motion. You don't have to do anything if you're happy with we're happy with the way it is right now.
Can I make a motion?
You remember the planning board, aren't you?
Yeah, I was waiting to give somebody else a chance.
Mr. Harding,
I would like to make a motion to follow what Mr. Bissonnette said, that we wait 1 month, let us digest what we heard. Certainly let Gary put down, like Mr. Bissonnette said, that see if there is, once this has all been taken in, that there are some changes that give us a better, on a case-by-case situation, how we can control certain things and that we're not stuck and regretting that we didn't see something because it came at us sort of fast. And I agree that I think a 1 month digestion of all that we've heard tonight would be prudent.
well, and if we're going to make changes, we have to look at the actual language.
Yeah, right.
You know, and that's what we can get out of our planning. If they suggest that we make certain changes, and we're the ultimate arbiters, we're going to decide whether we're going to adopt it or not. But let's at least take a look.
You know, I have trust in Gary.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second, Seth Platt.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Again, we have to do this by voice. Mr. Harding.
Aye.
Mr. Lopes.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye.
Mr. Garceau.
Aye.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Aye.
Palat.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. There are no nays. Okay, that takes care of that one. Now we're on to the sign ordinance. Is this you, Mr. Galvin?
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Speaking to this. Your voice is not on, Mr.
Okay,
There we go.
I don't,
First
I
of
think
all,
either Mike can speak to it. I'm sorry, can't hear. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. There's just basically a couple of technical things and then two provisions that are of substance. And there's one more that I think that we want to add to this, just one word, to strike one word. I guess, I don't know what I'm talking about. We brought this to the planning board, but suggesting that the planning board make a send a letter to the council proposing that the council adopt these amendments and hold a public hearing.
Okay. So you're putting in a purpose and then you're doing some other sort of minor changes to reflect the actual numbering system as I see it.
And then there's the provision about non-commercial signs.
Right, that's the sort of guts of this, right?
Yeah, it's the findings and a severability clause in the new section 1. And then we're adding a subsection D in under the general provisions section that says about non-commercial signs, to clarify that that the ordinance is not intended to prohibit non-commercial, political or other non-commercial signs based on content.
There we go.
Right, yeah. And in addition to what's shown on Mike's worksheet, there was one other, oh, I see it's there, I see it's there. Under subsection G of 7, that I guess it's changed to 8, just removing the word content. Signs which by reason of size, location, content, coloring, or manner cause or elimination, obstruct, hinder, or distract from the vision of drivers, etc.
7G. You're
Yes, because
eliminating content.
we just want to delete the word content because with the
Right.
Supreme Court decision in 2015 kind of created kind of havoc all over the country with sign ordinances and sign regulations about being content neutral and not being content based. So just by the fact that it says the word content, I'd rather delete that word.
There's this little thing called the First Amendment. Is that it, Kevin?
Yeah, that's it. We're just trying to make a few changes to update the ordinance in light of that, the recent United States Supreme Court decision.
Okay. Any members of the board have a question for Mr. Gavin?
I do. Kate Wilson.
Go ahead.
Can we make any modifications to this?
What do you want to change?
Well, on page 13, basically, when it comes to signs that have electrical work, it's basically it said that all parts shall be kept in good repair. Shouldn't we have something where we say that things should be looked at or reviewed yearly, inspected yearly?
I don't know, Mike, you ever want to?
I mean, the amount of work that would generate for the inspection department would be quite substantial. We have to have our electrical inspector pretty much go around town for about a month inspecting the signage.
Well, shouldn't it be the owner if they're the ones that pay for the electric bill? Say on page.
The idea here is to create a couple of issues that need updating in light of the Supreme Court's directive in the Reed versus Town of Gilbert case about the ordinances not being content based and being content neutral. We weren't intending to do a major overhaul of the ordinance at this time.
All right, then I'll wait until it is.
And I mean, at some point, I think there's a lot of things that I think the planning wants to address after we get the comp plan done and to go through our zoning ordinance and make a lot of changes to our zoning ordinance. And this obviously is part of the zoning ordinance, but we're just trying to address a couple of things right now without doing wholesale changes to the entire ordinance.
No problem.
Anyone else have a question? All right, let's open it up to the public.
And if you're dialing in, please use *9, or if you're using the Zoom app, use the raise hand function to be called on.
Give it another minute, then we'll give people the opportunity. They're going to do agenda in a second today. that's the same one, yes. Here's a duplicate. All right, I'm going to close the public comment period. What's the pleasure of the board on the request from the solicitor?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we accept the changes as presented.
What are we exactly doing here? Making a recommendation to the town council?
Yes, if you see the agenda, you send a letter to the council proposing that the council hold a public hearing and adopt these proposed amendments.
All right, so is that your motion, Mr. Lopes?
That's my motion, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second?
Second,
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Again, we have to do this by voice. Mr. Harding.
Aye.
Mr. Lopes.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
aye.
Mr. Garceau.
Aye.
Tibbetts.
Aye.
Palat.
Aye.
Chair votes in favor. All of us have voted in favor, so there are no nays. All right, we're on our last item on the agenda, and that is our monthly status report. Is there anything we have to look at here?
I have nothing to add to the report.
Okay. So what's the board's pleasure on the report?
Make a motion to accept, put on file.
All right, there's a motion to accept and put on file by Mr. Harding. Is there a second?
Second,
Seconds. I don't think there's any need for discussion. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
No, hang on a second. We got to do it that way. Mr. Harding.
Aye.
Mr. Lopes.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
aye.
Ms. Garceau. Mr. Garceau. I didn't hear Mr. Garceau.
He's muted.
He's muted. Mr. Garceau, you're muted. We'll come back to Mr. Garceau. Mr. Tibbetts.
Aye.
Mr. Palat.
Aye.
Mr. Garceau. Great. All right, we'll register him and the chair votes in favor. So we'll just have him as an abstention, D. So that we can-
Yes, I have you. I
All
have it.
right, we need a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second,
Everybody's in favor of that one. We don't have to worry about that. Thanks, everybody.